Her name was Ottilie Mabry, and nobody in the town of Willow Bend, Oklahoma believed she would amount to anything more than a stubborn little girl chasing a foolish dream. But by the end of that summer, every single one of them would stand at the edge of her father's field with their mouths hanging open, because what she grew there would change the way an entire town understood what one small, determined heart could do. It started 3 years into the worst drought Willow Bend had ever seen. The kind of drought old-timers talked about in hushed voices, comparing it to stories their own grandparents had told them. The creek that used to run behind the Mabry farm had shrunk down to a trickle you could step over without getting your boots wet. The well pump groaned every morning like it was tired of trying, and Roscoe Mabry, Ellie's father, stood on his porch every evening, looking out at fields that used to be his pride, now nothing but dust and disappointment. Roscoe had broken his leg that spring, thrown from a ladder while fixing the barn roof, and the doctor said it would be months before he could walk without a limp, let alone work a field from dawn to dusk, the way farming demanded. His wife, Ottilie's mother, had passed 2 winters before from a sickness that took her slow and quiet, leaving just the 2 of them, father and daughter, trying to hold together a farm that the whole town whispered was already lost. Ottilie was small for her age, with wild brown hair that never stayed in its braid, and eyes the color of creek water, calm, but always moving, always noticing things other people walked right past. She noticed the way her father's shoulders sagged a little more each week. She noticed the unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen table, the way he stopped humming while he worked, the way he'd stare at the empty sky for rain that never came. One afternoon in early June, while her father rested his leg on a cushion on the porch, Ottilie wandered down to old Delbert Pruitt's junkyard at the edge of town. Delbert had a mountain of things nobody wanted anymore: rusted tractor parts, broken fence posts, and pile after pile of old irrigation pipes that farmers had ripped out of their fields years ago when the county switched to newer systems. The pipes were bent, some cracked, most of them half buried in weeds and forgotten. Delbert saw her poking around and let out a laugh that carried across the yard. "What in the world does a little girl want with a bunch of old junk pipes?" he called out, wiping grease from his hands onto his overalls. Ottilie didn't answer right away. She just picked up one of the smaller pipes, turned it over in her hands, and looked down its hollow length, like she was seeing straight through to some idea only she could picture. "I'm gonna save our field," she finally said. Delbert laughed even harder at that, the kind of laugh that wasn't cruel exactly, just the laugh of a grown man who couldn't imagine a 9-year-old girl doing what grown farmers with decades of experience and thousands of dollars in equipment couldn't manage. "Sweetheart," he said, shaking his head, "your daddy's got real irrigation trouble. This ain't a problem you fix with a bunch of rusty junk." But Ottilie just smiled, thanked him, and asked if she could have as many of the old pipes as she could carry. Delbert, still chuckling, told her to take whatever she wanted. He figured she'd drag 1 or 2 home, get bored within a week, and that would be the end of it. He didn't know Ottilie Mabry. Every single day after that, rain or shine, though there was mostly just shine that summer, Ottilie made the walk down to Delbert's junkyard. She'd drag pipes home 1 at a time, sometimes 2, if they were small enough, her arms shaking, her hands blistered, sweat soaking through her thin cotton dress. The walk was nearly a mile each way, and the Oklahoma heat in June and July didn't care that she was small or tired or scared. At first, her father tried to tell her to stop. "Ottilie, honey, you're gonna hurt yourself," Roscoe said. One evening, watching her drop yet another pipe by the barn, her palms red and raw. "This isn't something a little girl needs to be carrying." "I'm not little," she said, catching her breath. "I'm gonna fix it, Daddy, I promise." Roscoe didn't have the heart to argue with her, not when he saw the same stubborn fire in her eyes that used to live in her mother's. So he let her keep going, telling himself she'd tire of it eventually, the way children do. But word got around town that the way it always does in a place like Willow Bend. Soon, everyone knew about the Mabry girl and her junk pipes. Kids at the general store snickered when she walked by, her arms streaked with rust and dirt. A group of boys from her school started calling her Pipe Girl, laughing every time they saw her hauling another piece of scrap metal down Main Street. Even some of the grown-ups, people who should have known better, shook their heads and murmured about how sad it was, a motherless girl with a busted-up daddy, out there playing pretend farmer instead of being a child. Ottilie heard every word. She wasn't deaf to the laughter, and she wasn't made of stone. Some nights, she'd come home and cry quietly into her pillow, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe she really was just a foolish little girl chasing something impossible. But every morning, she woke up, looked out at her father's dying field, and something inside her refused to quit. She had an idea, one she'd pieced together from watching her father work the land her whole life, from a school lesson about ancient farming, and from a library book on gravity-fed water systems that the town librarian, a kind woman named Farrell Whitcomb, had helped her find. Miss Farrell was one of the only adults in town who didn't laugh at her. Instead, she sat Ottilie down at a wooden table in the back of the library and helped her read through diagrams, far too advanced for a 9-year-old, explaining slope and water pressure and pipe placement in words simple enough for Ottilie to understand. "You really think you can build this?" Miss Farrell asked one afternoon, watching Ottilie sketch out a plan on a piece of scrap paper, lines connecting the old well to the far end of her father's field, using a network of salvaged pipes laid along a gentle slope. She'd measured herself with a piece of string and a level she'd borrowed from the barn. "I have to," Ottilie said simply. "Nobody else is gonna do it." By the middle of July, she had gathered nearly 40 old pipes of every size and shape. Most people driving past the Mabry farm saw only a chaotic pile of rusted metal scattered across the yard, and they shook their heads at the sight, sure that this so-called project of hers was nothing but a child's fantasy. Her father, despite his doubts, started to notice something different in his daughter. Even with his leg still healing, he'd sit on an overturned bucket near the pile, watching her sort pipes by size, scrubbing rust off the joints with an old wire brush, testing pieces together to see how they fit. She worked with a focus that reminded him painfully of his late wife, who used to say that patience was the one thing the land respected more than money. "You know," Roscoe said one evening, his voice softer than it had been in weeks, "your mother used to say the land gives back what you're willing to put into it. Doesn't care how big or small you are, just cares if you show up." Ottilie looked up at him, pipe wrench in her small hands, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Then I'm gonna show up every single day until it works." August came, and with it came the harshest weeks of the drought. The county issued a water advisory. 2 neighboring farms gave up entirely, their owners deciding to sell their land rather than watch another season die in the dirt. The mood in Willow Bend grew heavy, the kind of heaviness that settles over a town when the earth itself seems to be turning against the people who depend on it. And yet, every single day, Ottilie kept working. She had connected nearly the entire system. Now, running from the old well, pumped down a gentle slope, she had carefully measured and dug by hand, blister after blister, through nearly a quarter-mile of farmland. She used gravity, just like the library book had taught her, letting the water flow down through connected pipe sections instead of relying on the weak, aging pump to push it uphill the way her father's old system had tried and failed to do for years. Delbert Pruitt, of all people, became one of her quiet helpers by the end of summer. He'd shown up one Sunday afternoon, expecting to find the whole project abandoned, rusting pipes scattered uselessly across the Mabry yard. Instead, he found Ottilie kneeling in the dirt, carefully sealing a joint with a strip of rubber cut from an old tire, her small hands moving with the kind of precision that made the old man stop in his tracks. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, kneeling down beside her without another word of doubt. From that day on, he came by most evenings after closing up his junkyard, bringing her extra fittings, offering an extra pair of hands, and most importantly, offering his silence where laughter used to be. Word of Delbert's change of heart spread through town almost as fast as the mockery once had. People started to wonder, quietly at first, whether maybe there was something to the Mabry girls' project after all, but most still doubted. Doubt is a stubborn thing, harder to uproot than the driest cornstalk. Then came the last week of August, when Ottilie finished connecting the final stretch of pipe to the edge of her father's east field, the section that had been completely barren all summer, nothing but cracked earth and a few desperate weeds clinging to life. Her father, leaning on a cane now instead of crutches, walked out with her that morning as she knelt beside the old well pump, her hand resting on the rusted handle. "You ready?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion he was trying hard to hold back. Ottilie nodded, took a deep breath, and pushed the handle down with all the strength her small body could gather. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The pipe sat silent and still, and Ottilie's heart sank as she imagined all those months, all those blisters, all that mockery, amounting to nothing but a broken dream in the Oklahoma dust. And then she heard it, a low gurgle, followed by a rush, water moving through metal for the first time in years, traveling down the careful slope she had measured herself. Through joint after joint she had sealed with her own hands, out into the parched soil of her father's field. Roscoe let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, dropping his cane to grip his daughter's shoulders as they watched. Dark, wet soil spread slowly across ground that had been dead for months. Word spread through Willow Bend within a day. People who had laughed, people who had called her Pipe Girl, people who had shaken their heads at the sight of a little girl dragging junk down Main Street. They all found reasons to drive slowly past the Mabry farm in the days that followed, watching in disbelief as green shoots began pushing up through soil everyone thought was beyond saving. By September, while neighboring fields sat brown and defeated under a sky that still refused to rain, the Mabry field stood out like a stubborn miracle. Rows of corn and beans and squash growing tall and healthy, fed by a system built entirely from things other people had thrown away, connected by the small, blistered hands of a 9-year-old girl nobody believed in. The harvest that followed was one Willow Bend would talk about for years. Corn taller than Ottilie herself, beans heavy on the vine, squash so plentiful that Roscoe, still walking with a slight limp, had to bring in extra hands just to bring it all in before the first frost. And the extra hands that showed up weren't strangers. They were the very neighbors who had once doubted her, the boys who had once teased her, the grown-ups who had once whispered about the sad, foolish Mabry girl. Delbert Pruitt stood at the edge of the field on harvest day, hat in his weathered hands, watching Ottilie direct a group of volunteers with the quiet confidence of someone twice her age. "I laughed at her," he admitted to Roscoe, shaking his head slowly. "Laughed right in that little girl's face. And she went and built something that saved this whole farm with nothing but junk and grit." Miss Farrell Whitcomb came too, bringing a stack of books for Ottilie as a gift, telling her she'd never seen a student of any age apply a lesson with such determination. The town's pastor, a gentle man named Cassius Bell, stood before the whole gathered community that evening at a harvest gathering held right there in the Mabry field, lanterns glowing against the dusk, and spoke words that many in Willow Bend would remember for the rest of their lives. "We stand here tonight," Pastor Bell said, his voice carrying over the quiet crowd, humbled by a truth some of us needed reminding of, that greatness doesn't always arrive dressed the way we expect. Sometimes it comes small and stubborn and covered in rust and dirt, refusing to give up when everyone around it already had. Ottilie stood beside her father that night, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder, both of them looking out over a field that, just months before, everyone believed was beyond saving. The same field that had once been a symbol of loss and hardship now stood as a symbol of something far greater, proof that hope, when paired with hard work and an unwillingness to quit, could take even the most broken, forgotten pieces and turned them into something that fed an entire community. In the years that followed, Ottilie's irrigation system became something of a local legend. Farmers from neighboring towns came to see it for themselves, curious how a child's determination had solved a problem that had stumped grown men for years. She never charged a cent to explain how it worked, always saying the same thing her father had told her that summer, that the land gives back what you're willing to put into it, no matter how big or small you are. Delbert Pruitt kept a special section of his junkyard set aside from that day forward. Pipes and parts he called Ottilie's Corner, saved specifically for anyone in town who needed help the way she once did. And every single year in the anniversary of that first harvest, the town of Willow Bend gathered in that same field, not just to celebrate a good crop, but to remember the lesson that little girl had taught an entire community about the quiet, unstoppable power of refusing to give up. Ottilie Mabbury grew up to study agricultural engineering, eventually returning to Willow Bend to help other struggling farms design their own water-saving systems. Many of them built just like her first one, from things other people had thrown away. But no matter how many diplomas hung on her wall, no matter how many farms she helped save, she never forgot the summer she was 9 years old, dragging rusted pipes down a dusty road, while the whole town laughed. Because in the end, it wasn't the pipes that saved her father's field. It was a little girl's refusal to believe that small hands couldn't do big things, that a broken leg and an empty well and a whole town's doubt were reasons enough to give up on the land her mother had loved. It was faith, stubborn and quiet, carried one heavy pipe at a time down a dirt road in the summer heat, until the day the whole world finally saw what she had known all along, that the ones the world laughs at are so often the very ones who end up changing everything.
If this story touched your heart, you are not alone. Sometimes the people the world doubts the most are the ones who ends up changing everything. If you believe that too, drop a comment and let me know. And if you would like to more stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe. There is more hope coming your way. Thank you.